Hello, everyone. This is Dove Marcus, Director of Healthcare Raw Podcast, and I have a very special guest today on our show. Her name is Dorit Sasson. She is an incredible person with an amazing story. She's an author, a two-time author. Is that correct, Dorit?
Correct.
A two-time author. I'm a zero-time author, by the way. I'm still working on that first book. So congratulations on your second book.
Thanks.
It's called Sand and Steel, The Spiritual Journey Home, and we have some links in the bottom for you to follow. Dorit, I'd really like to, first of all, thank you for coming on the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So let's get right to it. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about your story? Now, I mean, obviously, you've put your story into a book. What can you share with our healthcare patients about overcoming challenges in life?
Yes, big juicy question, and it can take a very big juicy answer to answer that. So I'll be really good about giving some important nuggets of information. So when I first came to this country from Israel, this was about 10 years ago, I had only one intention, was to make it professionally in America, and our circumstances were very different. We really didn't want to leave Israel. It was our home, and that's the whole subject of the book, Sand and Steel, The Spiritual Journey Home. And in all honesty, my heart was still in Israel. I think many people listening to this podcast can relate and understand how much of a significance that plays out in Jewish life and spirituality and so forth. In our case, we really had to leave Israel for professional reasons. And that was like almost a real heartfelt sacrifice. And Israelis don't still call you out as a traitor. And they make remarks and make you feel like almost like you've done the worst sin possible. And I carried that burden on my shoulders, knowing that I had committed this real big sin as a traitor. Because it's one thing to make aliyah or immigrate to Israel. It's another thing to do yeridah or leave Israel permanently. And you get called out as a traitor very early on. And it's still prevalent no matter how many times Israelis try to disagree. And there's some, maybe there's differing views on the subject. But that was my personal experience. And on the kibbutz where I lived, where I met my husband, people would come by, the kibbutz members, and they would pass us by and they would call us out on that. Me personally, and I wasn't a member, and it was really painful. So in some ways, we had to leave the country, and to this day, we still feel like the country has let us down, or maybe the kibbutz in particular, and we would love to go back. It's just not possible. Now, how does this connect to somebody like one of your patients who is dealing with a physical limit problem or obstacle that just becomes more and more challenging over time? When I first came here, I said, I'm going to make this American dream work, and I am not going to be a victim of my circumstance. But it didn't. It was one thing to believe that, and it was another thing to actually follow through with it every day and wake up in the morning and say, I am not a victim of this. Just because, and I kept on trying to find the right heartfelt rhythm in that, and for some reason, it took its time registering. And I think people who are in my situation, not this kind of specific thing, but people who are waking up and they're just like, life is so challenging. How do I wake up in the morning? How do I move from A to B? How do I overcome this issue and that? And you might always say that it has to do with mindset, right? And how do you focus in the morning and how do you get up in the morning? But I think it's also the whole aspect of taking ownership and not realizing that you're the victim of your own story. And when sometimes things got really challenging here, like I wouldn't have, family because I don't have my family here, or, things in Israel are sometimes much easier in some ways than they are in America. And I would always say, oh my God, why does it have to be so hard? And I found myself getting into that mindset, like this negative self-talk. I said, this is so hard. I can't do this. Why does it have to be this way? And I think that kind of just puts you back in like this law of attraction type negative energy that you put out. You say, oh, it's so hard. And so it's going to be hard. It will feel hard. It will take that kind of stress and it will amplify it, and it will just shake the kazuki out of you each time that you're dealing with a stressful situation. And I said, there's got to be a better way to deal with this, you know? So I think that's the first real step, is recognizing, like, whenever you're in that, and as hard as it is and as difficult as it is, to just kind of catch yourself. And it's really hard when you're not used to doing it. But when you get up in the morning and you actually make a conscious effort to say, I'm going to break a habit with my negative self-talk, and I'm not going to enter this victimizing kind of dialogue that I've been carrying on with myself for 10 or 15 years, it becomes easier to catch yourself. So I am in that mindset of space of saying, you know, here's my personal development. I am a healthy human being. I wake up in the morning and this is what I want to conquer about myself at each time. And I think that's the first key, is being able to catch yourself on those moments and call yourself out and say, you know, I see, and hold yourself accountable. Say, I'm rooting out for you, and I see that you're not behaving right now. What are you doing wrong?
Wow.
Do
I'll tell you what, Dorit.
It takes a lot of discipline. You've got to really be aware, because most of us are just on default all the time, you know?
Yeah.
Don't pay attention to these things.
Amazing. That is so powerful. You know, that's like, you know, it just kind of shows me that, and I tell this to my patients a lot. I say, look, you're going through something that I've never experienced, and I don't want to experience. And because I haven't, thank God I haven't had a terrible illness in my life. So I don't know what it feels like or what it's like, but what I do know, and I have to be careful with that, because it's hard to tell someone what they should be thinking when you haven't. The point is that I believe that we all have our stories. We all have our stories, and there's a certain core of every story where if you can really bind to that or connect to what that person's going through, then you're connected to their soul, or you're connected as a human being. And just hearing how you're relating what you've gone through to someone who's going through illness. Like, your book it's not about illness. You're not a medical. This isn't even a medical thing. And I had this idea. I was like, hey, Dorit, come on the show. You've been through a crazy situation. Let's talk with other people who are going through a crazy situation. It's like this humanistic kind of way of helping each other. I think it's so cool. So I just wanted to reflect on that.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, that was you just loaded it on over there, because you pretty much you really touched upon the first, like the core, not just the first step, but the core as to how to overcome something. You have to be honest with yourself. You have to be honest with your thoughts. And even for someone who's a victim of circumstance, you were a victim of circumstance,
right?
But you still realized that the only way to really get through it is by strengthening yourself. So that's a very powerful message. And I thank you for sharing that. So is there anything in particular, any kind of like sneak peek kind of snippets of the story that you want to share with us? Anything that stands out that can excite people about your book?
Thanks for asking. I'd love to just give a snapshot of a real moment in time that's kind of where the book takes us on a journey. So because I'm an American, you hear me talk English, and I am, not a Pittsburgher, but I grew up in New York City. And so I do have the ability to be understood in English. But my real challenge was, having lived in Israel for those 20 years of my life, leaving New York City as a teenager and coming from Israel as a wife and mother, I came back to a place where people were speaking another language. It almost felt like there was this word SUV. I had no idea what that meant. People were using the word Target. In Israel, there is no Target. There's no Costco. You know, people were talking in like these acronyms. I was like, OMG. I mean, that's kind of where I started. That was not my baseline. That was where I started. And I came and I was like, on the kibbutz, you know, there's no Target, there's no Costco, there's no SUV, because Israel is a very small mentality. People are very social and they're very wired and interconnected. And when there's, God forbid, a terrorist attack or a bomb threat, the whole country kind of bands together, and it's just like one big CNN. And nobody gets lost. You can't get lost in your head. You can't be too alone. People won't let you. The culture won't let you. It's not wired like that. You can't just say, I'm going to go and walk in the park and forget about this, because everybody's talking about it. So, you know, the chapter 1 is really about coming to terms with the war and understanding that the kibbutz in Israel is no longer our home, and then coming to Israel, leaving Israel and coming to America as an American, but having this huge problem of dealing with RCS. So maybe your patients don't know what this is, or you, but it's actually called reverse culture shock. And reverse culture shock is not as common as culture shock when we go to another country, or even when we go to another state. And you hear Americans say, I was in culture shock. I went to California and, you know, they do such and such. But reverse culture shock is actually a fully documented syndrome that's on the U.S. Department of State, referring to people who have lived for an extended period of time abroad and come back and they feel misplaced. Everything
in their original home, in their original place where they lived.
Yeah. Their home has been one thing and meant one thing at one point. Then they go abroad, they live for X number of years, they come back and they're kind of disoriented. So that the whole idea of finding your home is so widespread, you know, universally, and it can be seen in the way we interpret our own story, right? We tell ourselves a story and we don't feel comfortable with the story that we tell ourselves, but we still feel like we're a victim. So we're trying to find our own home in that story. But for me, it was like, how do I find my home again in this country? I'm an American. I can speak English. People understand me. But I feel like everybody around me is speaking another language. And coming from New York straight to Israel, and then from Israel to Pittsburgh, it's like boom, 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 like a weird triangle. And it really disoriented me. So the first 5 years, I've been here for 10, the first 5 I would have to classify as, how do I get out of this RCS? And of course I was feeling like I'm the victim because, hey, you know, you guys forced me to leave. I didn't have to leave. There's a higher level of entry stress with RCS. If you have been forced to leave the country, or you had to because you had no choice. In my case, we could have stayed and it wouldn't have been a problem. But the fact is, we had to leave if we wanted to make things work economically, and that was the situation. So in a nutshell, I think that the story, the message, the overall message, where it starts in chapter 1, leaving, making the decision to leave Israel after the Second Lebanese War in 2006, really reflected on this need to find a home, or acknowledging this need to find a home, that Israel is no longer going to be our home, coming to terms with what that feels like. And I think that that's a challenge when anybody's going through an adversity, is to be able to see a bigger picture. And it's really, really hard when it's all very emotion driven and they don't have that ability to get into a bigger mindset and a mind space and say, you know, what am I doing with my life? What does this all mean? How do I come to terms with this? And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway in my story, or starting with chapter 1, is learning to be able to accept that this country now is no longer for me, and to accept the fact that I have to go to another country to find my home.
Wow. And here we are, right?
And here we are. That's where the story begins in real time, 2006, and it continues until it plays out today. And I think when we're having this conversation about adversity, all the Americans that are now contemplating leaving for Canada, because of the situation, or all the Americans that want to go to Israel, and there's so much coming and going around this topic of home, that I think that we have to understand that home for many people means many, many different things. For an immigrant who's coming to this country, it means this. For a patient who's living in Pittsburgh and dealing with stress, it means, how do I, find a better way to live? And even if I'm in Pittsburgh, how do I find a better way to live?
Right. Or coming home from the hospital. Coming home from the hospital.
Coming home from the hospital, exactly. And how do I reevaluate or re-diagnose what it is that I need right now? And it's kind of more medical or, physical in that respect. But how do I reassess my needs right now and start from there? So there's a starting point and there's a constant way to view this. But I think the overriding point is that the more negativity, if you can see an obstacle with its vision of what it will ultimately give you, without seeing it as a stigma, because when we left Israel, both of us were called out as traitors, and to this day, they have not reconciled their differences with us. It's kind of like when we go and we visit, it's like, we know what we did to you. They say that. One of them, people have approached me and said, the kibbutz never treated you fairly. They didn't give you what you guys needed. We totally understand your need to leave. It's like your country has let you down. And, sometimes it's so easy to say the hospital didn't do this, or this doctor didn't do that, or I wasn't given enough chances to heal, or this person didn't, come in through for me. And I think the more we just not forgive, I could, find myself every day saying, oh, that stupid kibbutz didn't help me, and look what they've done to me. They've ruined my life. But in the end, we've managed to flourish here. We both have really cool ways of bringing in income, and it would have probably not have happened or materialized if we ended up in Israel and never moved. But, as I said, our hearts are still there, and it's a challenge because you give up something for something else, not knowing what that something else will be and look like. And you give up, the main thing is you give up family. And when you leave the hospital, you give up that kind of support of a hospital. And then, a new mother who's leaving the hospital, starting a whole new journey at home with a new baby and postpartum stress. That's I've been through that twice, and everybody can understand what that feels like who's a parent. And it's just, learning how to take ownership of your emotional miles and not get stressed by the one thing that ticked you off or didn't come in.
Right.
And I think those are growing points. Those are growing pains, and those are moments that really test our ability to grow. And we can really stay so smothered and suffocated, or we can really learn the finer picture. And I think this is where people get lost, mainly because they don't have accountability, they don't have the support, and they don't have the awareness of what's happening in their mindset when they're going through a difficult moment. And if you can, what I think has helped me greatly is, waking up in the morning before the day takes over and saying to me, and I say to myself, what do I need right now in my business? Who can help me? Who can get me from A to B? Who is the best person I know in the industry that I can afford right now? Who can help me get from this point to that point? And just like realizing that you have a better purpose in life than just waking up and feeling, victimized, that things aren't working farther, faster, higher, better, that kind of mindset.
Right. It kind of reminds me, bringing it, of course, as we've been dancing around, and you've brought this to the patients a lot. What I find with a lot of my patients is that coming out of the hospital, there's, it's often it isn't a pleasant experience in the hospital, and it's kind of like, and I mentioned this in an earlier episode, if you have a room full of people, you have 100 people in the room and 2 of them are jerks, you're going to remember those jerks. So I have the people who come out of the hospital and they just remember that nasty experience, the one person who yanked them up in bed, or the one nasty thing, and that's what they carry with them. So what I try to do is get your mind off it. Let's focus on where we are right now. Let's be thankful for where we are right now. Let's compare where we are right now with where you were a week ago. And really just getting your mind out of this trap of dwelling on the nasty things in life, where the only way you can really get out of it is by focusing on something positive. So that's always one of my goals in helping people who like you, in a different way, right, have gone through something and now have that challenge of just letting go. Let go so you can heal. Let go, heal physically, emotionally, spiritually. So that's how I will draw a parallel to the healthcare situation. You
Yes.
see, I really do believe I can have anyone. It's amazing, Dorit. I can have anyone on this show. I can have a garbage man on this show. I can have anyone on this show, and we can all bring it back to that same point.
Right.
Because we're all living. And that's another thing that I try to share for my patients. I get it. You're not a patient. You are a person who's going through something. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, and I think when you're in the hospital, they take away a lot of your freedom and your humanity. At least that's what it feels like. But it doesn't have to be like that. I mean, having visited patients, friends of mine, or have been a patient myself, I can tell you, like, immediately it's very transformational. They give you a gown. You're supposed to act and behave in a certain way. There's rules to listen to. I've been there for very short things and short procedures where, thank God, it wasn't like a long-term play out. But, when you just that 6 hours is enough for you to get a taste of what it is to be on the other side. And I'm sure I know that they do a lot of hard work, but as a patient, it sometimes feels that there's a disparate, they're not connected to each other.
A disconnect,
and there's lack of compassion because they see so many patients each day. So it's hard to keep that momentum of passion and compassion going. And I think you know what passion is. So the experience of being able to, have a conversation with anybody that comes on your show or your podcast rather is just all around this ability to connect and make a human connection. And it's those moments when you really feel like somebody has taken something away from you, made you feel like you're not good enough, didn't give you enough of what it is that you needed in the moment for whatever reason. And being in a hospital is a very vulnerable experience. And being in the situation where I was, having to make a decision between this country and that country for the sake of economy. I mean, God forbid anybody has to leave Israel, but it's a very legitimate thing to leave because of parnasah or making money for feeding a family. And that's also kind of a stigma feeling because that's why Israelis get called out about it, because it's this kind of loyalty. You should be loyal to this country. You should stick around. You have family here. There's people who care enough about you that you should stay here until you die. Right. And I think that this kind of like feeling when you, in any kind of conversation you have with people, you'll notice the tension that comes. It's this expectation that they should be doing it this way. They should be getting this care. They should. And it doesn't play out in that. And so what do you do when your expectation doesn't match the reality? That's where your work has to come in as an individual, because you can't solve the whole problem of the industry in that one moment, in one scenario. You have to make do with what it is that you have at the moment. So if there's somebody lacking compassion, maybe as a patient, you have to be that compassionate person. Maybe you have to ask for what it is that you need, instead of expecting that the doctor should figure out and read your brain. Maybe that's where, maybe they need more education. Maybe it just is a matter of triggering them so that they become a little bit more sensitized. Sometimes I noticed that when I was in a patient care situation, and I said, hey, I'm feeling a little nervous about this. Is it going to be okay? Or what do you think of such and such? Not like, oh my God, I'm scared. giving this kind of panic attack. But those kinds of moments, or can you hold my hand? I'm a little nervous right now. My family isn't here to be with me, and I feel a little vulnerable. Sometimes I said those things, and I didn't regret saying it. I wasn't, having second thoughts. But it was like, let me advocate for myself, basically.
Yeah.
Let me advocate for myself emotionally. And I think those are good things to keep in mind, because when we get into this kind of victimization, that's where it becomes more of a problem. Then we're like, well, I should have gotten this. I didn't get that.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think if we can keep ourselves grounded that way emotionally, then we go into this new situation kind of a little bit more with strength, a little bit more with koach, a little bit more with, a better attitude. We're luckier that way. We'll be in a better mindset, and it's not, you should have, I didn't get, it becomes this pointing fingers sort of game, and it becomes very confrontational, and it doesn't always have to be that way, is what I'm saying.
Very awesome. Hey, Dorit, I'm looking at the cover of your book.
Yep.
The cover of your book is a fantastic design. I see sand in the foreground.
Yes.
And I see Pittsburgh, which is the Steel City, in the background. And you are walking through the sand towards the city of Pittsburgh. That is that really says a lot. And the book is Sand and Steel, The Spiritual Journey Home by Dorit Sasson. Dorit, what is the best way, aside for the links at the bottom, how can we get that book?
Great. So right now it's through a pre-order campaign that's going to be getting me closer to a publishing goal. So every pre-order right now is helping me with those numbers. It's a crowdfunding platform called Publishizer, and it has a time limit on it. So by the end of that next month, which is July, and we're finishing now June, so July 27th, around that time, is when this campaign officially ends. And by helping me spread the word of, and by helping me share this message of what it means to find one home and find another, I will hopefully also be able to find a publisher that will give me a contract based on the numbers that I'm able to achieve as pre-orders. So the numbers are really important at this stage, and every pre-order gets me closer to the goal. Right now I'm at 87, and my goal is to reach 250. Which is what is the entry level number for an indie contract, which is beyond hybrid. And hybrid is how my first book was published. And it's a different type of publishing model, which I don't want to go into probably right now. It's not part of your program. But for my purposes, it's easier for me to just talk about having a pre-order number for Sand and Steel. And it also helps to raise funds for publicity and marketing as well.
Awesome. Well, Dorit, I thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming on the show and sharing your story and relating it to our dear beloved patients.
Thanks so much, Dov. It was great connecting, and so cool that we're local.
Isn't that cool? So
cool.
All right, Dorit, be well, and I look forward to your success in this book.
Thanks so much. Bye, Dov.